Hello, peeps. We are back for another episode. And today we have a guest speaker that Michelle Lazurek reached out to me, and I was happy to have a conversation with her and want you to listen in on her story today. And I'm going to introduce her. Michelle Lazurek is a multi-genre award-winning author, speaker, pastor's wife, and mother. She is a regular contributor for Believe.com and Crosswalk.com and has written for Focus on the Family, Campus Crusade for Christ, and Christianity Today. She is also a literary agent for WordWise Media Services. When not working, she enjoys sipping a Starbucks latte, yum, collecting 80s memorabilia, and spending time with her family and her crazy dog. What kind of dog do you have?
A Bernese Mountain Dog.
Oh, those are big dogs.
They are in general. So the males can get up to 120 pounds. It's like 90 to 120. Females can get between 70 and 90. And both the dogs that we've had have been on the smaller side. So she's like 73 pounds or so. She's probably about the size of a golden retriever. So she's pretty. She's good. She's
that's around the size of our lab. So yeah, that's a good size dog.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I'm so happy that you reached out and would just love to dive into your story. So I know we had chatted before, and I know you've had an interesting childhood, and I just wanted you to share with us a little bit about growing up with your mom.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very controlling household. There was definitely a lot of favoritism very early on in years. I was not the favorite. And my mom, who kind of was the head of the household, she kind of wore the pants of the family and kind of drew those favoritism lines early on. So my oldest sister was kind of the favorite for her. And so when you deal with any sort of favoritism in your life, you tend to go two different ways. Either you swing the pendulum, where you kind of are the prodigal and you kind of go out into this wild life of drugs and no one loves me, so I'm going to go out and just do whatever I feel. I kind of go wild. Or you swing at the other side, which is kind of like the oldest son and kind of that lost son parable, where it's, I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to work for this approval. And so I was the worker. So I did whatever I could to kind of earn my parents' approval. So whenever I got good grades, I did something that they liked, and I kind of got that proverbial round of applause. I knew that I needed to do more of that to get more of that approval. And so that becomes something that's so deeply ingrained in you that it's really hard to let go of. So growing up, that's what I learned early on. Then when I became a senior in high school, God kind of started to knock on the door of my heart. And I had grown up Catholic, and my grandmother, who lived next door to me, we'll talk about her in a little bit, but she really was the impetus for my faith that I have today. I really attribute a lot of that to her. And so we went to Catholic church every week, and I loved it. And, I put the offering the plate. I served. I went to Catholic school my whole life. I served. I wasn't an altar girl, but I did a lot of the lecture reading. So when they had readings, they'd have some of the kids come up and do that. I would do that. So I learned early on, number one, about my place in the church, kind of that acts of service. And I also had a very positive experience with church and with God. And until my senior year of high school, and I wouldn't necessarily say it was a negative experience, but I started to have more questions about my faith. And it was just then that I'd met a person from my workplace, and he had just had a radical transformation with Christ. Like he kind of grew up pretty much a heathen. Like he didn't really have any sort of background in faith at all. His parents did not attend. He didn't attend. And so he started reading his Bible, and he knew that I was Catholic. And so we would have these conversations by phone, and we would just debate for hours, because in my mind, all pride, was like, I need to know more than him because I've gone to Catholic school my whole life. That's my whole life.
You're not a heathen.
I know, right? Not me. And so we chatted, and what I couldn't get over was, number one, that he knew his Bible backwards and forwards. And that
Yeah.
was the first thing that really struck me about his transformation of faith. We were never really encouraged to read the Bible, and actually,
Right.
as a whole, Catholics are not normally encouraged to read the Bible. They believe that
Yep.
the minister should be the one, the priest
Mhm.
should be the one to interpret the Bible for you, and so often you would
Mhm.
get that in the homily,
Yeah.
each week. So it's I wouldn't say it's necessarily like banned, but it's not encouraged either. So there weren't many people that I knew that were reading the Bible often. So it
Mhm.
wasn't something that I would normally have done until that junior year of high school. And I remember hanging up the phone one night after one of these heated debates, and I remember thinking to myself, how is it that he knows more about his Bible than I do? And I wanted to know more.
Mm.
And so the Lord, of course, answered my prayer, and he invited me to go to church with him. Before that, I had attended a youth group for a short time. It actually was led by my now husband. At the time, he was just somebody who was running one in a Methodist church. And it was the same thing. I'd go to youth group and it would be fun. You'd have the fun and
Mhm.
games, then you'd sit down and do the lesson. And there'd be
Mhm.
people there, like he would say, turn to First Corinthians. And I didn't know where First
Yeah,
Corinthians.
where's that?
Yeah. And there'd be like, and there was a guy that I was dating there who was able to turn my Bible to First Corinthians. And it was the same thing. Like,
Wow.
he didn't attend church. Like, how did he know this? And so I was like, how in the world do all these people know this? And so it was
Mhm.
intrigued. I was like,
Mhm.
we can read this for ourselves. And so I decided to go to church with my friend. And it was at that church that a woman kind of took me under her wing, and she knew I was Catholic. She was also Catholic, and she brought me to do a Bible study at her home. And so one of
Mm.
the first verses that we ever studied was John 3:3. And this is the verse where Nicodemus is questioning Jesus. And, Jesus basically says, no one can come to the Father unless you're born again. And
Yeah.
so that was around the mid 90s, where it was like the David Koresh years. So what we
Yeah.
TV was Born Again David Koresh with like people holed up in these,
In
um,
Waco.
yeah, in Waco with guns, and police were surrounding
Mhm.
him, and they were going to die like for the faith. Like that's what we knew. So it was like those were wacko Waco years. So we thought born again Christianity was wacko. Like we didn't think
Yeah.
that that was
Not
what
healthy. Yeah.
right. It certainly didn't seem like something, that I wanted to be a part of at all. And so I was surprised that that's what this Bible said. And so this woman was smart. She obviously had been Catholic too. And she said, don't believe me. She said, go home and get the Bible that you got from your confirmation. And she said, and open it
Mhm.
up to the same verse and see if it's the same. And sure enough, it was. The wording was a little different. It was
Right.
born from above, I think was what the wording was, rather than born again. But I remember thinking, oh my gosh, like how much of this Bible do I not know? And how
Right.
much do I really need to know? And so um, I continued to go to church, and the pastor gave an altar call at one point, and I went up not because I wanted to necessarily give my life to Christ, because this woman had asked me several times if I wanted to accept Christ, and I said no, not because I didn't want to, but because I felt like I was being pressured to, and I didn't
Right.
want to do it for her or for anyone else. I wanted to do it because that's what I wanted to do. And
Mhm.
so I was on the fence about it, and the pastor gave an altar call, and I went up to the altar, and I knelt down, and this woman who had taken me to the Bible study put her arm around me, and she said, "You want to accept Jesus?" And at that moment, I kind of felt like this burning in my heart, like not
Mm.
exactly heartburn, but kind of like this odd
Like,
sensation I never felt before, which I would
yeah.
imagine the spirit probably working, doing something.
Yeah.
And so I said yes, and so we accepted. She led me in salvation prayer, and so we said it together, and we got up and we hugged each other, and she took my hands in hers, and she said, "Your life is going to change." She said, "You don't know when, you don't know how, but your life is going to change forever." And I just thought that was weird. Like I didn't feel any different. I didn't.
Mhm.
Turns out I found out that most of the youth from that church were praying for me, including the gentleman that
Mm.
I held debates with. And so they were excited to hear that I had, kind of gone on this journey, and that I gave my life to Christ. And so they were really, really excited for me. So right now, this is the end of my senior year of high school,
Mhm.
and I've given my life to Christ. And a few months later, I started dating who is now my husband, my boyfriend at the time, who was a Christian. He also, but from this mutual friend that I'd been having all these debates with, also decided to turn his life around. He'd kind of fallen away a little bit during his high school years
Mhm.
and came back to the faith. And he was being called to be a pastor. And so that was something I didn't know right at the time, but he was really moving forward in his faith, and I was well aware that that was his intention, is that he wanted someone there who was going to go with him
Yeah.
to. And so, we started dating around September of that year, and I didn't tell my parents that I had become this born again Christian
Mhm.
until February of '97. So when they found out, they were furious, and they thought that
Mhm.
my husband had something to do with it because we were dating, even though he
Right.
hadn't. And so we got into very, very heated discussions. Some horrible things were said
Mhm.
to me that no parent should ever say to a child. Um,
Mhm.
and this continued on for probably about 2 years until I turned age 20. And then they wanted me to reconvert back to Catholicism. I said no. And that kind of went on for a few years.
Yeah. And that, I hate that you said that, but I love that you say, like, as a parent, they said things they never should have said to you. And I think that's really important for people to hear because you have to remember as a parent, like those words stick with a child, even a teenage child forever. And so it's really important that as parents, we are really careful about, even if we disagree with where our kids are in
Yeah.
their life, that we're very careful about still letting them know that we love them and that nothing should be said that can't be taken back and, burns in their soul. When you were 20, you set some high boundaries
Yep.
and with your mom, and then you ended up getting married. So tell us a little bit about that story going into after high school years.
So yeah, so now I'm a freshman in college, and I'm having arguments with my parents pretty much every time I talk with them now. So now
Mm,
it's my mom could tend to be a very manipulative person. So
mhm,
it's your grandmother, you're killing your grandmother by doing this. The same grandmother took me to church all those years, so it was kind of like this weapon,
mhm,
you're hurting your grandmother if you continue on and all this, and you know. If you do this, you're dead to us, kind of thing. And
mm,
so this continued on. This was very physically and emotionally exhausting for me. This is a very, very tough time in my life, to the point where I had to talk at one point to my mother, and I just said, "Look, Mom," I said, "I'm an adult now because at this point I'm 18."
mhm.
And I said, "If you need to talk to me like an adult, and I said, if you
Yeah.
can't talk to me like an adult, then we can't talk at all." So we wound up not speaking for about 6 weeks, from probably about September until November. So now this is right around holiday time, Thanksgiving time. So
Mhm,
I had not spoken to my family at this point now in several weeks. Didn't have any place to go for the holidays for
mhm,
Thanksgiving. And so my now husband, boyfriend, said, "You can come eat Thanksgiving dinner with us." And so I did. And that following Saturday, I went to work. I worked at an optometrist's office, and I worked one day a week. And I worked till 3 o'clock, and my parents knew that. And so they came to the optometrist's office right before 3 o'clock, and they said, "We know you're getting out of work. We'd like to talk to you." And so I said, "Okay." And so I did my shift, and I walked out, and this was in a like kind of a strip plaza. And so my parents took me outside, and they said to me, they said, "You have 2 weeks, get your stuff out of the house. We don't want you here anymore." And so I,
mm,
of course, was devastated. This was, obviously a shock to me. I didn't have anything at that time, just the $50 that I'd gotten in my pocket, and that was about all. My then boyfriend was coming to pick me up. We normally spent the weekends together, and they sent him home. They said, "We'll take her home." So they brought me in the car, and of course, the whole time they were arguing. And I got home, and they lifted up the garage door, and there were all these black trash bags, and they had filled it with all my stuff from my childhood home. And
mm,
they said, "The rest of your stuff is upstairs. You can continue packing." And so I went upstairs and continued to pack. And my mother's coming in and out. And she's hollering and yelling and crying and all these things. So I finished packing, and I brought the rest of my stuff downstairs. And my dad kind of put it all in his red pickup truck, and he drove me to Joe, my boyfriend's house, who only lived a few minutes away from me, 10 minutes away. And he dropped all the bags off, and he said, "You have chosen your family, where it's obvious we're not your family anymore. You've chosen your new family, and so you can go live with them." And so he dropped all the bags off, and he pulled out of the driveway, and he left me there. And of course, I was in shock. I was
yeah.
just beyond myself, sobbing in the middle of the driveway with nothing but
Mm,
$50 and some clothes that I had, and some old like stuffed animals from my room, and that was it.
Wow.
And so Joe took me in, of course, and comforted me. And I stayed with him for a few weeks, but I knew that I couldn't stay with him. We kind of knew at this point
Mhm.
our relationship was headed toward marriage, and
Mhm.
we were choosing not to live together. And so I knew I couldn't live with him, but I also didn't have any place to go. So I'm like, so what do I do?
Mhm.
So there was actually a family in that little church where I accepted Christ, um, had heard my story. And one day they came up to me and they said, "We've been praying and we feel that God is calling you to come live with us in exchange for watching our children. You can do so rent free." Because they knew I was going to college. So I still had 2 years left.
Mhm.
So they let me go to live at their home rent free and watch their children for them as kind of their babysitter. And I lived there for about 2.5 years until I got married. And
Wow.
so it was in those moments that God really used to show me what the church really is like and what it really
Mm.
and how much it really can be the tangible hands and feet of Christ. Like I've never seen the love of God more abundantly than in that little church so long ago.
Wow.
Actually, where they lived was right down the street from Joe, so I got a chance to see him a lot, which was good.
Oh, that's sweet.
That was good. So I stayed there. I finished college. He was starting his college career, and so we actually moved to Alberta, Canada. That was September of 2000. But that semester before that, that April, he went off to Canada. Get a feel for things, get us a new church, get us a place so we can kind of feel out what's going on. And so he went that way. I finished school. I graduated in May. We got married in June, and then in August we kind of made this trek to Alberta, Canada. Went to Bible college there, and got married and started our college career there. And about 2.5 years into that college time, my husband started to feel like he was going to plant a church, and so I
Mhm.
knew. And he felt like it was going to be back in Connecticut, where we were originally from. And so
Wow.
this was a mixed bag for me because, it was nice to have that distance for 2.5 years
Yeah.
because I needed that time away from my parents, because when your parents live so close, whether you're speaking to them or not, it's still this
Yeah. They
real,
know what's going on. Yeah.
or it's a sense of dread, it's a sense of not, things aren't finalized, things are still in turmoil.
Right.
So having that distance really was very helpful. It's very healing to my soul. So knowing that I would have to go back into this calling of planting a church back in Connecticut was really a mixed bag, because I knew that I was going to have to go through some of those things again with them. When we told them that we were coming back, I got a chance to visit her before we actually moved back. And for whatever reason, I don't know if the Lord was working on her heart or what, probably, she said she wanted to kind of bury the hatchet. And so she kind of would put the past in the past. And I could say anything I wanted to her. And so I said, "Mom, I've said everything I need to say." And the Lord had really worked on my heart with forgiveness for
Mm.
her and for our relationship. And I came to peace with the fact that, as someone who didn't have the love of the Lord, didn't know God's grace and forgiveness, that was as good it was going to get. And that I
Mhm.
had to do my duty as a Christian to forgive her and to make peace with that and to move on, and to grieve that we were never going to have a close motherly relationship
Mm.
again. But I had to understand that God wanted to step in and be that mother and be that father to me that was missing
Mhm.
since I was
Mhm.
12 years old. And so I was grateful for that. And I said to her, "Mom, if you have anything you want to say to me, you could." And she didn't. And that was okay, because that was right before we moved. And about 3 months
Mhm.
after we moved, she passed away suddenly of a heart attack. And so
Mhm.
we were able to kind of put things behind us right before she passed. So I was very grateful for the Lord's intervention, obviously his sovereignty and his
Mm.
foreknowledge of what was going to happen. And so, I fully believe that, as much as she could with what the knowledge that she had,
Yeah.
a lapsed Catholic, that she did as much in her own soul as she could, and as much forgiveness to me as she could. And so I was very, very grateful for that intervention from the Lord.
That's really good. Yeah, and I think it's really important. It's funny, I was just having breakfast with a friend, and she's struggling with her father's not doing well, and there's a whole history there, but It's funny how we talk about forgiveness and things with parents that we have this fractured relationship with, and it doesn't always work out the way we think it's supposed to work out, the way in a row, the way sometimes we're taught that it's like, oh, well, you ask for forgiveness and then it's given and everything's great. And then, happily ever after. And
Mhm.
that's not always the case. And sometimes there are parents that, or even children that just don't know how to get to that place. And so it's important for us to feel the forgiveness for ourselves and know that as much as possible this is where they are in their state of life. And so being at peace with that and knowing that God knows and he's going to cover it where it needs to be covered. And then that's all we can really do, because sometimes it just doesn't always like wrap up in a nice little bow. I think as long as we try and we get to a place where we forgive them and also just release that for our hearts so that we don't pass that on to the next generation, I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. So I love that. So I know when you became a mom yourself, there was some emotions that came up for you. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So even when you have done your best to kind of patch things up with mom and now she's passed away and you never really
Yeah.
got that close relationship that every child wants with a parent, when you have your own child, those feelings and that fear of
Yeah.
becoming like your mom really do creep up on you. And I remember when I had my son Caleb, he's my oldest, and I was so afraid that I wouldn't be a good mom because I didn't want to repeat the same behaviors that my mother had done to me growing up. And I
Mhm.
wish I could say it was completely the opposite of my mother. Um, as I look back, I realized I had a lot more of her tendencies earlier on than I wished I
Yeah.
had. I was
We all
probably a
do.
lot angrier than I should have been. I yelled at my kids more than I should have been. I was more
Yeah.
impatient than I should have been. But I remember there was a one day, probably about 6, 7 years ago, and I can't remember what it was. I think I'd gotten into a spat with my husband, and my kids looked at me and said, "Mom, why are you angry all the time?"
Mm.
And my daughter said, "Yeah, Mom, you yell a lot," and that just broke me because
Yeah.
I it's easy to justify things in your own minds like, "Well,
Yeah.
he's making me angry, so I'm doing this," or "I'm
Right.
justified because this person's not doing what they're supposed to be doing." And I just went upstairs and I just wept before the Lord.
Mhm.
I just said, "God, I cannot break this." I was like, I knew it was coming from my mother and what I had seen in the example I had growing up. I said, "I don't want to be like this." I said, "But I have no idea how to break this." I was like, "Father, you have to.
Mhm.
This is a generational curse. You got to break it because I don't know how to do that." I said, "Father, you got to help me as best I can." And so I went downstairs and I apologized and I said I would do my best not to be angry anymore.
Mhm.
And honestly, by God's grace, and it took a while. It wasn't
Yeah.
instantaneous, but I will tell you, I'm way less angry with them than I have ever been. And it's certainly not to say I don't ever get angry with them anymore, but I would
Yeah.
definitely say the Lord did a mighty work in that area for me that I wasn't getting short tempered with them all the time. And I was able to temper my anger at times and let things go and not get so worried about micromanaging every little thing. And so the Lord can do, in God's grace, He can do whatever He needs to do to step in for the voids that your parents leave
Mhm.
for you. And so as a female and motherly relationship, even the parts that I didn't get right, um, God is able to step in and he's able to
Mhm.
fulfill for us. And so I was just those are the moments those are the moments when you realize that you're not so great as you think you are, but also that that God, he knows that and he loves us in the
Yeah.
midst of that, and that he has the power to equip us to be better people and to be transformed.
Yeah.
He can transform our minds, he can transform our thoughts, he can transform our hearts and our actions. And so those are the moments, that moment there where God was able to break that from me, made all that I had gone through in those years where I was really suffering for Christ. I mean, I don't know how else to explain that, but it's,
Mhm.
persecution for lack of a better
Mhm.
word. And for all of that suffering, those are the moments when you're so happy to have done what I've done because I had the power of the Holy Spirit within me who was able
Yeah.
to transform me and to right the wrongs that I was making in my kid's life. So I was so glad that I was able to do that. So one thing I have to say that I was grateful for, as I look back in my relationship with my mom, and that's saying something. Like, that's totally growth for me to say that I am grateful for my relation with my mom, because there were so many years I
Yeah.
wasn't, and I
Yeah.
was mad for not having a real mom, not having
Mhm.
somebody who was nurturing these other moms were, and how come I didn't get that, kind of grieving that. But as I look back, I definitely was probably more of a helicopter parent than most were.
Mm.
I did take that tendency from my mom, and that's how I parented my kids. And I have come to appreciate that, because I know, think as I've grown and matured, and talked to other people who have had different types of parents, there are definitely people that I know who had parents that really were very lax in their parenting, and were very limited in giving their kids rules, or following through, or um, maintaining themselves as the authority of the home.
Mhm.
All those things that are so vital, that I think honestly we're losing a little bit of. Um,
Mhm.
I'm really extremely grateful for, because my mom knew where every toenail was on me at all times. And I hated that, obviously, as a kid. I hated that as a young teen. There were certainly things that my friends got to do that I wasn't able to do. And I was mad, because I wanted to do the things my friends were doing. But as I think about that part of my mom's mothering to me, she really
Mhm.
did exemplify good parenting, in that sense, about
Mhm.
maintaining authority, and she was a person who commanded respect, and
Mhm.
I appreciate that about her, because you'll have, I mean, especially as teenagers, they definitely break boundaries, and they definitely want to test limits. They do that throughout their whole lives, but the teen world is a whole new ball game. And
It's a whole different breed.
it is. They become like whole different people. Like, they walk down the stairs at 13. You're like, who are you?
Yeah. What happened? I want my little baby back.
But like I said,
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to have had her example of authority and respect
Yeah.
and honor. Honor is a word that I would use to describe that she did not allow anyone to disrespect her, and that she wanted to be honored as the Bible calls us to honor. And I'm
Mhm.
grateful for that, because that is a strategy that skill that I used throughout my parenting. And for so many years I was nervous, because my husband, who was a bit more on the lax side of parenting, was
Mm.
what I would consider the good cop of the relationship, and I was always the bad cop, and I was kind of the
Yeah.
disciplinarian. And I was one, and so of course the kids, of course they gravitate toward him, because he's the fun guy. And for years I resented that, because I'm like, I want to be the fun person. I'm not
Yeah.
telling mom what to do all the time. But I will tell you what, both my kids now are, my daughter's 18, my son is 20, and
Mhm.
both of them have come back and thanked me for
Mhm.
being such a part of their lives, and being able, because I was able to speak into so many areas of their lives and give them
Mhm.
wisdom,
Yeah.
and being able to kind of use the gift of wisdom that the Holy Spirit has given me since I've accepted Christ.
Mhm.
um, they have both expressed how much my opinion, particularly my opinion, but both of our opinions matter to them.
That's
And
so
even
good.
just recently, kind of getting into relationships and things,
Mm.
they both said, my daughter actually said, "I just really care what you think." And I was like, I was
Wow.
wondering the way that she wanted my opinion and my approval, in a sense, about who she's dating,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it was something that we wanted to instill in them. I wanted them to get people that they could kind of walk their faith out with, someone strong,
Mhm.
someone that would walk with them, not someone that they had to drag along, and to kind of be
Yeah.
discerning in that area. And so I'm so grateful that I was able, that I had a role model in my mom in that way. Maybe she wasn't,
Mhm.
there were moments when she gave wisdom, she did, but just having that parent that was always there. She wasn't there emotionally necessarily, but she was definitely there physically. And there was
Yeah.
never a time when I look back in my childhood, where she ever let me down. Like, there was never a time when, like, I really need this permission slip and she didn't follow through, or I
Right.
really need this thing to be done and she didn't help. Like,
Yeah.
she did, where, she may not have done the project for me necessarily, but she definitely bought the supplies, made sure I had what I needed. There was never a time when I couldn't rely on her. And I honestly
Yeah.
think I carried that into my parenting. And I think both our my kids have appreciated that, and I think they will as they continue to grow up too,
Oh,
that
absolutely.
having
Yeah.
a mother that was always physically there, and I tried to be more emotionally there because I didn't have that growing up, and so I
Yeah.
really come to appreciate that aspect of her parenting, and like I said,
Yeah.
that is a work of the spirit because, for so many years, I was like, "I'm never gonna be like my mother, I'm gonna be like nothing like her," and, of course, you always take away traits from them, but I think that was a good trait that I
Mhm.
took away
I think
from her.
it's important too. Like, there's two things I hear you saying is one, we ask God to come in and help us when we realize like there's something that we're doing wrong, which is really good parenting. When you realize like I'm too angry, like why am I doing this? Like, please come and help me. I remember a moment with that with my 3-year-old at the time and going in my room and sobbing and saying like I don't want to be like my mom. And then two, one of the things with the journey with being unmothered is I coach this a lot in women is also, if you can, when there isn't like extreme abuse or something like that, is trying to find the good things in your mom. Because, like, one of the things I always say is, like, I loved my mom. Like, my mom was funny. Like, she was an awesome cook. Like, there were things in my mom that I have pulled and used as tradition in our family. My mom would always make hot tea for like anything that was a hard struggle. Like, we would make hot tea and just try to sit with that. And I did that with my kids, and I see my adult girls now doing that, and my oldest daughter with her children. And so I
Yeah,
see like those kind of traditions can still go on. So if you can find those really awesome things about your mom, hold on to those. Those are things you can bring with you. The other things are things that, you have to name those things that were done that were not right and were not okay, and realize like they are people and they're flawed just like us.
sure.
And that, we don't have to pull everything from them. We can learn from those things. And I think part of that is asking God, like, where can I pull the things that will serve me and move forward in our family? And where are the things where we need to say, we're not going to do that anymore because as the next generation, we want to do it better. So it's twofold, and then, that helps us not to be so controlling as a parent to try to like hold on too tight to our kids. And I will say with teenagers, like it is that pulling away, like they're like woman child, they want to be hugged, and then they don't want anything to do with you when they're teenagers because they're pulling away into their own person. And it's kind of painful to watch and have that happen, but at the same time it's a beautiful thing when they can start becoming more independent and have their own mindset of how they are going to live their life out. So I love that you've come to that place, and now your kids are at that really sweet spot where they will become more appreciative as they go along and really come to you for advice, and also realize, there's probably some things that my mom did I don't want to do exactly like that, and that's okay. So I think that was like, it's a really beautiful analogy of just parenthood in general, is that none of us do it perfectly, and nor should we. It's like we're
Right.
just human. We're we're
Yeah,
going to make mistakes, we're going to mess it up. But I think being able to recognize that too, and having those conversations with your adult children and saying, hey, I kind of messed that up over here, I'm really sorry, and owning up to that will give so much respect for your adult children, for you, to where they trust you and they will come back and ask for your advice because they know that you're not trying to know all and be all. You're just like anyone else trying to live this life, and we're letting God guide us wherever it needs to be at that moment. And it's not a perfect walk. I want you to tell me really quickly just about your Nana. I know that she was the one that brought you to faith, and just talk a little bit about the faith that she left for you.
sure. So she was a devout Catholic, and she lived right next door to me, and so I spent many, many weekends there. We did a lot of wonderful things together, and one of the things we would do is we would go to church together, and that was really how I learned about God, was from my Nana. And I'm really grateful to have had a spiritual mentor in her in that sense,
Mhm.
and she really helped me understand who God was, in that. And so, when I went to church with her, I'd, light a candle and I would pray, and I would pray for the sick relatives, put the offering in the plate, and then I was able to serve as I got older. And all of that really has had a profound effect on my faith today. And I don't think I don't think it would have been as easy to accept Jesus when I got older, because already knew about him, and I attribute my grandmother's faith to that. So I think it was very easy for me to accept Jesus because of that. But I don't think that there's any. I really don't think I would be where I am spiritually without having that influence, that role model in my life. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. I came from a home where, as I made it clear, my mother never apologized. So
Yeah.
I didn't understand forgiveness and grace. And
Yeah.
just quickly, I remember a time when I was like 8 years old, and I I think it was there, and she'd made some cookies, and I kind of stole one, and my Nana asked me if I'd had one. Of course, I lied and said no, and then she said, "Are you telling me the truth?" And I said, "No, I ate one." And so we were supposed to watch some sort of TV program together, and she said I couldn't because I had lied, and so got so mad, and I just screamed, "I hate you!" And I ran away back to my house, and I just cried and cried and cried because I thought, what have I done? Like that's it. Like I'll never have a relationship with my Nana again, because that's what I saw growing up. Like when I was
Mhm.
always the one who had to come say I'm sorry, and my mother would accept it, but then, she would go on and she'd still be the same angry person as she was. So it was really hard to understand the love and grace of forgiveness and how to let something go. And so I kind of knew I had to go back and apologize. So I went back, and I just went and I just started crying. So I'm so sorry. And she just came and she just put her arms around me, and she just let me cry on her shoulder. She said, "I forgive you." And I just remember that moment. Like, it's almost like Jesus
Yeah.
was there with me at that moment, just saying, I forgive you. And she never
Yeah.
brought it up again. So that was a very important example, I feel, that of forgiveness and grace that I learned from her, that really did affect and allow me to be able to embrace that spirit of forgiveness too as I get older.
So beautiful. Yeah. And grandparents are really important. So now that
Right.
I'm always thinking like, oh, I love those stories because I'm like, oh, they're listening to everything I'm saying. I have to be really careful. So I love that. Okay. So best part is you are coming out with a children's book called
Hall of Faith.
Hall of Faith. And I know we're going to put all of this in the show notes too. So we'll be able to have people order your books this October. Is it at the end of October it's coming out?
Yeah, so October 29th. They can pre-order right now, but
Okay,
it will
cool.
officially release October 29th.
Very awesome. And just a short review. What is that book about?
So I have it here. Shameless plug. And
Nice.
so it's called Hall of Faith: Remembering Ordinary People Who Trusted God, and it's basically the retelling of the Hebrews 11 Hall of Faith passage for children.
Nice.
And it's for children ages 5 to 8. And what I love that they actually added in was a refrain that's repeated throughout the book. And I'll just read a quick page. So this is basically highlighting the different people of the Bible who God asked them to do these great things, and they had to take a leap of faith and obey him. And so it says, God asked Abraham to give his son as a sacrifice. Isaac was the son God had promised Abraham and his wife Sarah. Abraham was given a difficult task, but he had faith because God can be trusted. And that's the
Mm,
refrain that's repeated throughout the whole book, is that they had faith because God can be trusted. And so that's the main takeaway that I would love people, the children, to take away, and for parents, is that in
yeah.
a sense, we can have, the premise behind it was, I wanted kids to understand that they could have their own, they could be in the Hall of Faith themselves, in a sense, because they could do so by the acts of faith that they display. And so even when God asks us to do these great things for him, or even difficult things for him, which is
Mhm.
highlighted there, that when we understand that God can be trusted, we can take those leaps of faith with God. And we know that he can be trusted through all of that.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful, Michelle. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today. I highly recommend going and checking out all of her books, but especially this one. Pre-order this book. It's great for children to have books that they could read about having faith and trust in God. So, super excited about that. And peeps, until next time, we will see you later.